computer. Okay, we're recording.
Okay, hi.
Hi, my name is Danielle Blunt. I am a professional dominatrix based out of New York City, and I'm here today with Charlotte Cross to talk about high protocol DS relationships and maybe a little bit about mommy daddy little play.
Yes.
Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, hi, I'm Charlotte Cross. I'm an adult performer in Los Angeles, California. I'm also now a law student and avid Kinkster. I teach a lot of classes, but I also take a lot of classes. I'm still learning every day when it comes to kink. And I'm excited to do this podcast. Or it's not a podcast, it feels like a podcast though.
Maybe, who knows?
You should release it as a podcast.
Maybe. I've just been having a really fun time getting to interview people who I like. Basically, I'm like, oh, I think you're interesting. I would like to have a conversation with you. Let's record it.
Awesome. It's good.
But yeah, I'm super interested in hearing a little bit about how you came up in the kink scene, because it sounds like we have somewhat of a similar, 18 years old guard, found kink very early.
Yes. So I'm a preacher's daughter. The beginning of my lifestyle journey was, I found the internet. I was very young. I was doing some Googling, just looking, we had talked about this before, but I was doing some Googling because I thought one of my friends was in an abusive relationship. I'm like, what does God say about abuse in the Bible? And up comes something called Christian domestic discipline. And I was just like, whoa. I'm like, God wants me to find a husband that is going to spank me because I am naturally bad, because Eve ate the apple. It was like, I think I was very brainwashed, Southern Baptist. And so going, I was just dying to have some kind of structure like that, going from one thing, a religious thing. I think I just internalized a lot of religious stuff, and I became, it just became very kinky to me. And so from there, I ended up finding, Fat Life and then the Upper Floor. And my first relationship, I was a trained Gorian, Kajira, and very strict leather, high protocol in Virginia. I always say that that's where I grew up. I'm like, I grew up in a Gorian household.
I always have to change it to be I grew up to I came up in kink.
Yeah, see, I just feel like that was the time where I started out as this baby submissive, being able to express my true self. And then I grew up from there, because I think I've done some of the most amount of learning about myself through DS and BDSM, learning how to set boundaries, express what I like and what I don't like. And that was something I really couldn't do before.
How did you find the household that you came up in?
I was working for a doctor, and so it was the doctor's son who had just graduated from medical school and finished his residency. And so I was working at the office as a medical assistant, and it started out as just funny spanking jokes. I'm like, what, are you gonna spank me? And then
you're like God wanted.
Yeah, God wanted this man to spank me. So I found it through that. I remember the first thing that he ever had me do, I was studying at a bar. Well, not a bar, it was a restaurant bar, but he was at the bar with his friends. And I had never hung out with him outside of work. And I flirted with him very hard. Sorry, I'm going to drink.
Go for it. I'll have
some coffee. I'm like, I was flirting with him so hard, very aggressively. And he was like, I want you to go home to my house, because I knew where he lived. And so it was a very small town. It's I want you to go to my house. This is the garage. I want you to go inside. He gave me a whole list of things to do, from grab the gentleman's jack, put it on the put it on my fireplace, like on top so I can see it when I get home, let his dog out, put his dog back up, and then stand behind the door and don't sit on the bed. And he was like, stand behind the door and wait for me and don't sit on the bed. Well, I was very excited. So I finished all of these tasks very quickly. So I was standing there forever. I was like, how long is this movie? Like, and then I had sex with him. That was one of the first like and only times that we actually had sex. But after that, it just became strict. Like I told him like my interest in all like kink and stuff, and he was like really involved in the community. It was almost like this magnetic force that just brought us together, like very unknowingly. I don't know if he just saw something in me or what, but he like knew. But I still keep in contact with him. Like we have a very healthy relationship. I think that was a very important thing for something ending. Like when it ended, I was leaving to move away to a different college, and I wanted to go to medical school. And he still sends me like suture kits and stuff, and like he taught me how to do sutures. Yeah, so like
that's so sweet.
He used to fuck me up though. like being like so much needle play. Now
I would say doctors and people who grow up around like medical spaces are very kinky. It's so interesting hearing you talk about it, because my dad was a dentist, so I like grew up in like a medical environment, and I also found like a high protocol training chateau when I was 18, where you like had to earn your leathers to come up, and like this like 24/7 DS training dynamic. And it's very intense, especially, and like I found it because they were giving like an educational lecture near me, and my friend was like, I don't know if this is crossing any boundaries, but I've heard some shit about you, and it would be rude of me not to send you this link.
So I think that's actually how I found you.
Really?
So, okay, this place that I live in now, my condo that I have now, my ex's parent, well, my ex-play partner, one of my very good friends now, his parents own it. And so this used to be his room. And then when he bought a house, I ended up just I ended up renting from his parents. And so I was in this room, like
very spot.
2 years ago, I think 2-3 years ago. And, my friend was like showing me, Mistress couple, I think, okay, was showing me her and then your profile with hers. And I was like, she's so hot. And he was like, look at this amazing, like, he's like, you would love this. After you go on tour in New York, you should just book time at the chateau to like, cause they rented out.
Yeah.
Or at the time they did or something. So this was like a while ago.
Yeah, a while ago.
But I was like, okay, I'm gonna follow them. So because my intention was to just after I went on tour and like was doing like a lot of sex work, I was like, I need to get this shit beat out of me afterwards to like recenter myself. And like yeah, and so that was actually how I found that's how I found you online.
So interesting. Yeah, it's so interesting. We were talking about it a little bit before, but I feel like I'm personally so drawn to those 24/7 dynamics, and they can also like breed a lot of toxicity and like problematic relationship dynamics that are sort of veiled by a DS dynamic. And I have like a very complicated relationship with a place that I trained. Like I met a lot of really interesting people. I learned a ton, and like I always say that I learned a lot. I learned the most about the abuse of power.
Yeah.
Like that's where I learned about power dynamics, was through the misuse and abuse of power. But also it was like a very amazing place, especially before I found that place, I had never even like thought to Google BDSM. It was just because it was always power that was interesting to me rather than like a specific activity. So I would like find a porn clip that where like the woman was a little bit more dominant, and even if it was vanilla sex, I was like, okay, I'm gonna watch minute 2 to 6 of this
Yeah.
of this clip over and over again.
That's great. Yeah, I think that like the thing that you have to be very like these relationships, DS relationships, especially when they cross over into the 24/7 like area, you become, I mean, you are as a dominant, you that there's a codependence that you're like you're modifying somebody's behavior to be very codependent on you. And then I also think that it can be the same way for a dominant. Like sometimes they rely too much on their submissives. Like I know a guy who I used to play with whose wife used to put toothpaste on his toothbrush every morning, and he's like, whoa, like,
When
that's
that's
not
not
happening
there.
anymore, like it, and there is a lot of toxicity, as you said, that comes from that. And I found this, I don't know if you've read Christine Abernathy's Erotic Slavehood.
I haven't.
I actually really like it. I haven't read the whole thing, so I can't speak to all of the material in there, but the beginning of it talks about how there's two parts. There's a part for the mistress, and if you're in a mistress dominant, it's really more for like mistress dominant relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but it's a great book for any relationship. I recommend it to a lot of people because it actually is a workbook.
Mm.
And one of the beginning points that she makes is like how the submissive should find something that they love to do, and how they could use that later on to be in service. But it talks about like how you should come up with like 5 activities that you enjoy doing yourself, so that you're not losing that sense of self. Because I think often, instead of just becoming our best self
Right.
in these DS relationships, we end up becoming codependent. Or like my therapist uses the term overgiver for
Mm-hmm.
codependency. That's how she explains it. And she's like, you become like almost fixated on only being in service to this person, and only being like there to be
Right.
useful to this person.
That's that's super interesting. That's a good activity. I feel like I've learned a lot over like the 12 years that I've been exploring DS, and I like have definitely seen those dynamics come up, and especially as like someone who also does professional DS, which have like high elements of service involved in my DS relationships, I've gotten much better about like making boundaries around that, and like getting actually like scared when I see like that kind of enmeshment
Yeah.
starting to happen. And um, people don't always like it when they come to me for service, but like I always ask, I'm like, do you have any kink community?
Mhm.
And like, do you have at least like a friend or a therapist that you can talk to about this relationship? Because I think um, at least the space that I trained at, a lot of the people who were there didn't have that. And I think that that makes it more difficult to like check what's happening in a relationship. I was like, I would like to be accountable to a community, or like you to have support, so that like if you feel uncomfortable with something, it's not just me being like, no, that's
Yeah.
fine, don't
Yeah.
worry about it. So like that there's this like it feel like it gets unhealthy when it's just
Too.
one-on-one and that's it and nothing else exists. And I like to frame a lot of the service tasks that I give submissives as like service to community, like creating resources, or like you're serving a party. So it's like both focused on me as well as like them finding
Others.
community as
Yeah.
well.
I think that is like, I've never heard of somebody really doing that. And I think that that's just a really healthy way to establish a relationship. Because there was I was in like a pretty long term service led almost relationship with a male dominant who used to speak with my therapist. Like there, we had we thought we were setting a lot of boundaries, but we were not, because I was just so it was the only thing that I wanted to do was if it was done for him.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember towards the end of it, I was like, aren't you proud of me? And he's like, why can't you be proud of yourself? And that was like, looking in on that, I'm like, why can't I be proud of myself?
Yeah.
Because I have gotten to the point where I don't matter anymore.
Right.
And that I have like had to learn about why that was wrong for
Yeah.
so long, because I lost a lot of my community when I left Virginia, obviously, and doing it professionally. I work with a lot of people that aren't actually lifestylers. So
Yeah.
they're, when I was working at Kink, like now they don't really hire lifestyle people the way that they used to at the Armory. And
Right.
I was working with just like a lot of like porn people that are like, that's so cool that you have a dominant, and like that's, really cool. But I'm like, you know nothing about this. Like,
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, it's cool, but I'm not being healthy. Like it's a very fine line. And I had to learn still how to set boundaries. I remember one time you and I had a conversation via Twitter where I had played with this girl, and I'm like, I was like, she won't leave my house. Like, I don't
I
know what
remember
to
that.
do. And you're like, what? Just give her money for a taxi, or call her a taxi and like tell her to leave. And I'm like, I don't want her to sub drop. And you're like, it's not your problem anymore. I'm like, what? I could not understand.
Right. You couldn't, like, the boundaries around it.
Yeah.
I think it can become confusing, like, when you engage in a DS relationship, like,
Yeah.
what are you agreeing to engage in, especially like with casual play. Like that's one of the reasons I don't do pickup play. It was like never something that was super interesting to me, but I was like, even professionally, if someone doesn't follow up with me via email, like that's part of my negotiation process, is like, I'd like you to follow up with me via email, even if you like didn't have a good time, if you're able to.
Yeah.
But like when I don't hear back from someone, I like, it like fucks up my like top drop. And like, I think I've also avoided playing with a lot of hobbyists because of that, because I do have like a high barrier to entry,
Yeah.
of just like not being available for same day sessions.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting. And I feel like we all like learn about what's healthy through like doing unhealthy things and then being like, oh, like maybe I'm not gonna do that again, or like I can change this.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's a reflection. I think that I didn't understand how to like reflect on my behavior and change it until I like was very comfortable in my submission and realizing like it's okay to be wrong, and it's okay to not do things the right way 100%
right,
of the time as the perfectionist that I am.
right,
Um, and so I think that I've been able to reflect a lot on the bad things or maybe just the things that I did without knowing it was wrong, because I thought I was being a very good submissive
right,
during a lot of like when I talk about that relationship that I had with that male dominant. I thought that I was like being super healthy, but I actually was being like really manipulative, and I just didn't know. And I'm like, but I'm being the best submissive I could be.
right.
And like I'm doing so much to be in service to you, but it wasn't what I didn't keep good boundaries.
Right.
So
And yeah, and I feel like it's like the boundary between self and other can become enmeshed in 24/7 dynamics. And I don't think it's necessarily the case in like high protocol DS service based relationships, but I think people who are interested in those type of dynamics might have other like relationship or behavioral patterns that could potentially go amok.
yeah,
I know that I also um I like to like talk about how like you have like, before serving me, you have to like be able to like be in service to yourself, and like it's not like, and I think it's like it's an interesting like pathway for some people, because some people can get there first and some people like really need to like serve first to be able to like come around to be like, oh, I actually like I am like worthy of that on my own outside of that
yeah.
relationship.
I think that was kind of the path that I took, where I love service work. I was a pageant girl. I was Miss Virginia back in the day.
Amazing.
Yeah, I was like really into pageants. But to be into pageants, you have to do so much service work. And
Yeah.
I've done a lot of mission trips, medical mission trips. It it just really makes me happy. But then I had to like realize, I love doing that stuff. And so without the kink involved, I just didn't understand that often I was doing a lot of those things and burning out. And I
Yeah.
was becoming very, I was just avoiding all of my own issues. And so it wasn't until I'm in like a one-on-one dynamic with somebody that I realized, like, why do I need to keep doing all of this service work and like give and give and give until I have nothing left to put into me? Like, I
Yeah.
can't just, it's like, I would want to skip school because I'm like, oh, I need to meal prep for my dominant. And like,
Right.
you can't do that.
Right. It becomes like a way to like, I feel like it becomes unhealthy when it becomes a way for you to, like, the universal you to avoid doing
Right.
the work of caring for the self. And then I think that also then like becomes a vulnerability where then the top is the only one who can care
Yeah.
for you if you like are rendered like overwhelmed or burnt out by the service, and then that's the only person who you're like having that type of dynamic
Right.
with, can kind of be like a feedback loop.
Yeah. Well, that's why I'm just like, I want to avoid any kind of like anything that's too serious. I mean, like, I've taken, I think, 3 years off from like
Yeah.
playing, just because it was just so much, and I couldn't, I couldn't function afterwards. So now I'm like, I'll let a Tinder date choke me. But I have a whole toy room. I actually have a person that I've been like playing with, but it's just like heavy impact play.
Right.
And I'm like, all right, I don't even need aftercare after this. But he's like, let me cuddle you. Like, oh God, okay, it's fine.
I have a submissive that I play with who like does not like aftercare, but lets me do it as service to me because
Yeah,
I need it.
that's how I am. I think that maybe it's changed now because I'm a lot more comfortable with my um with like people touching me. I don't like to be touched a lot. Like, hit me and make me cry before you touch me, okay? Like, I need to be like,
Gotta earn it.
yeah, I have to be a puddle on the floor before you get to pet me, all right?
Yeah.
And so, but I had to get like really used to that because through taking a lot of classes and talking to dominants, it is something that people need. I think it's something that I need when I talk. Because I remember like going back to that conversation we had, I was like, what if she self-drops and it's all my fault? And like, I just want to make sure I'm giving enough, but still like keeping those boundaries. So.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And I think too, it's like you want to give people a good experience and also like want to respect your own boundaries, like on both sides. And I really think like the more experiences that I have, the more I feel like having those conversations ahead of time is like both very helpful, but also like will never encompass everything that could potentially happen. Like I had someone get triggered during play that I did just through like a simple way that I touched them. And I'm like, there is no way that, because it just like reminded them of something else. And it was like, they were like, I never would have thought to tell you that. And like, and it was like a lot of emotional like labor and investment to like work with them to like get back to a healthy place. And it was like very hard, but like I feel like that's one of the risks that we like have to be aware of when we're doing like very intense play.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to also talk about the DDLG and MDLG. Yeah, okay. It never rolled off.
Mommy, daddy.
I definitely jerk off to way more like mommy, daughter, like whatever, mommy.
Yeah.
Is it mommy, daddy, whatever?
Mommy
MDLG stuff. Yeah. Mommy little stuff. Gosh, I just can't. I watch like way too much lesbian porn and like have I'm like way more into that, but I have never felt, I had one mistress that I bottomed to, but it ended up becoming like, I wasn't actually getting back what I was giving.
Right.
And yeah, so I was like, I can't trust women. I'm terrified. Like, this is so scary. But like, also, I always called like mommy, daddy, like, you know, mistresses, I always call them daddy in the event of playing like that. But daddy's gender neutral.
Yeah, daddy is gender neutral.
So
I like love, recently I've been embodying more mommy space, but also I like go through phases.
yeah, right. I know I'm the same way.
Yeah.
But for the MDLG stuff, one thing that I realized, I don't know if you have an opinion on this, that I had a hard time when I first got into the lifestyle. It was not cool to do DDLG. Like, it was very frowned upon. Like, it was just like they, like, littles were not allowed in a lot of spaces. They're like, oh, you're a little, like, so my feelings towards it was, I'm not a little, like, I'm big, first of all, and I like to get waterboarded for fun. Do you think you waterboard littles? No, you waterboard badass, like, slave girls. Okay. And so I had this like diversion to being called a little, and I think I kind of still do. I'm still like, no, and I saw that you tweeted something about a
Yes.
that's like that is me to a T. I'm like,
what was it? She was like, I'm not a little, I'm an Aries. I'm the baby of the zodiac. And then later said, I'm not a little, I'm just immature.
Okay. Yeah, I love that. Like, I mean, I say that all the time where I'm like, I'm not a little, but like, I am like, can I have a sippy cup before we go play? Will you put champagne in my sippy cup? Like,
I feel like people who exclaim they're not a little while having kind of a tantrum.
yeah, for sure.
It paints its own picture.
Yeah. But so, I really wasn't comfortable ever using like the term daddy. I actually have a screenshot on my personal Facebook that I posted in 2011, and it was during the time when I was on FetLife. I think I was like 17 on FetLife, but oops. But I was just reading things, and so I'm like, guys calling themselves daddy, like, you don't even have kids. And I was so offended by it that I posted on my personal Facebook page like how awful this is. And I'm like, I could never, like don't call yourself daddy, that's disgusting. But now it's like I built a whole brand around the word daddy.
Yeah.
So I think it took me becoming really comfortable with like myself and being able to be very comfortable with another person, of being like, I can reduce myself to this like childlike person, because I feel very safe, as like a child would feel with like a caregiver. But it took this like huge level of security before I was ever like daddy. It was still very weird at first.
I'm imagining you writing a like children-esque book, like, are you my daddy?
Yeah, literally. We did
this guide to embracing DDLG.
So funny that you say that, because I had this book in Afrikaans that there was a male dom that I played with, and he's South African, and so it was half of it was in English, and then it was in Afrikaans, and it had an English translation. So it was called Isaac Klein, like, am I small? And so it was the name of the book, and it's such a good book. They have like, and he would read it to me, and I'm like, okay, maybe I am a little small. Like, all right.
The Good Girls Handbook.
I haven't seen
that. I'm gonna see if I can go. Oh my god, it's right here.
Love that.
This is not planned, but it's the Young Girls Handbook of Good Manners.
Wow, I would love that.
I'll send you a copy. It's so funny, and it's like, I'll read you one. So, good manners in class. Do not draw the teacher's private parts on the blackboard, especially if she showed them to you in confidence.
That's so great. I love that.
It's very funny. But that's so funny that it was sitting right there too.
It was
I was
ready
just
for
like, I
me.
summoned it.
It was ready for us.
But I love how you talk about that type of play as like tapping into caregiver and like little archetypes, because I really, that's what most of it is about for me when I do. I think there are some like age play dynamics that have more like incest role play, more like taboo elements. And then I also think that like there are ways to play with like daddy, mommy, little dynamics that have nothing to do with that taboo, and just like really tap into like this like nurturing, like repatterning attunement, and like really
Yeah.
allowing someone to like allowing the submissive to like flow into like this submissive headspace where you like don't have to think about adult
Right.
things, and then the like daddy or the mommy to like be, like play and like
Yeah.
and I
I
yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was gonna say, like, I also do work as a doula, so like have experience, like, and like study psychology, so have experience like actually working with actual like children and actual mothers and parents. And there's something really beautiful about watching a parent attune with a child. And like, I'm thinking right now of, I think her name is Beatrice Beebe, is a psychologist who studies infant attachment to mothers. And I went to this psychosomatic training conference at Columbia University, and they showed her videos of a baby's eyes, like slowing down mother baby eye connections to like very, very slow. And you could like literally see the baby and mother's like facial expressions attuning to each other in slow
Wow.
motion. And I was like, that's what I do in play when it goes well.
Yeah.
And it just like really clicked for me when I like started to embrace the like mommy archetype more.
Yeah. Well, that, I think that like once I finally had this, I had when it was really good, I had a great like DDLG relationship with like, I now reserve just the word daddy for that person. I haven't like transferred it anywhere, but or I guess the honorific daddy for that
Yeah.
person. But we did so much of like tapping into my, just allowing me to like grow up and like just
Yeah.
have like this being okay, just like, you know, feeling and expressing emotions and not having to like be so um not just having to be like, I could be vulnerable. I was
Yeah.
allowed to like be vulnerable, and I think that that was where a lot of my healing, just from like my childhood and, you know, um these attachment injuries, I think a lot of my healing started with that.
Yeah.
And my ability to like, I mean, I think that's a big reason why I don't engage in a lot of like sexual stuff with like, even if it is like sexual, it might not be it, or it just might not be like, it's not the same as like when I'm having sex with like my vanilla partner.
Right, right, right. Maybe
So I
different
just,
activities,
yeah,
similar
so
energy.
I just don't really engage in like that with any dominant, because I think I was always kind of seeking a way to heal and like be able to connect with authority figures and
Right.
not be like abused, you know, not be in like an abusive environment. And so yeah, the allowing like yourself to be taken care of, a lot of people don't have the ability to do that. And I certainly didn't until I kind of started to tap into DDLG. But that took me a long time to understand how I could use that to heal, you know, and coupling it with therapy.
Yeah, it's so interesting too, especially from the conversation we were having previously of like sort of like losing yourself in person. I think especially for like people who are like adultified, I don't know if that's quite the right word, adultified as like an
Yeah.
actual child and like took on the caregiver role very young, it can be very healing to like allow yourself space
Right.
to explore what not having responsibility
Yeah.
feels like. And I think it's important too, like it can be really healing and it can be super triggering for people.
Yeah.
And I like, especially with like people who really like regress
Mhm.
within a scene, I really encourage people to find like a kink supportive or affirming therapist. I know that
My
at the
therapist.
Somatic Witch on Instagram talks a lot about like repatterning attachment through play. And I've been in conversation with her about like Ageplay specifically. Very interesting.
I'll have to check her out. Yeah, my therapist is a kink positive therapist. She's amazing. She does so many good things for sex workers. I've been with her for like going on 6 years, I think.
Amazing.
So yeah, she's seen all my ups and downs of play, and she was like, you seem so much more dominant now than you were like a while ago. And I was like, I just want to be vanilla and just be strong. Okay. I don't want to be defined in kink terms right now.
Yeah. That's a good boundary though. That's like,
yeah, well, I never thought I would get to that point, but I'm like,
right.
wow, this is what, like when I went through like the ending of like a really important kink relationship to me, I described it as, waking up in the morning and like just doing my slave positions as like slamming the last little bit of heroin that I had, and just like that drug, it felt like almost like an addiction where
Right.
I didn't know like how I was ever going to feel that really high that I got from like, serving someone. And I had to spend a lot of time just like going through what felt like I would think a detox of that.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that was something where I'm like, I'm just going to take a break, and then I can, I want to be able to still have fun during play, because eventually it gets to the point where it's like not fun. If you're not doing things that are healthy. Like I always felt that I was on the break of like, or like on the edge of like always needing to be corrected for something because I just wasn't getting what I needed eventually.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think like it is an altered state, especially if you're someone who like falls really deeply into that state. I got to, for one of these interview series, I got to interview my former submissive, and she talked about like, she would refer to like doing service for me as church. And she was like, it was really hard. She was like, I was doing like a lot of my time was devoted to like being at church. And like, that was my self-care. And it was like very interesting to be able to have that conversation with her after. And we also like were able to like be in touch slowly throughout it, which I think was very helpful.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like a cold cut, but yeah, she describes as something very similar as to like the thing that I was doing to like care for myself is no longer an option. What do I do? Floundering. And I was also like cool, I gotta clean my house now.
Yeah.
Like I have much more things to do now.
Yeah. That's so crazy that she says that, because that's what I call
really
play. Yes. I used to like worship my dominant as though he was God to me.
Yeah.
And I would listen. I have the whole playlist of like Christian music that I would listen to before I would get in. I would get into like a headspace before we would play. I would just play it all day long and sit in like the corner with my gas mask, just like listening to this like Christian playlist that I have. Because if you take a lot of like Christian music and you apply it to like DS, just pick any song and pretend like the dominant is God. It's trippy.
It is. I actually have a lot of Hasidic clients because they like me because I look very Jewish.
Yeah.
And it's very similar. And I have a client who literally prays to me, and like I am like very culturally Jewish, not like particularly religious, but like I do know like a lot of the prayers, and like he will like change them slightly to be in like worship to me. And it's like he's going into this like divine trance, like you might see someone doing like in very intense prayer.
Yeah. So my mom's Jewish, so technically I am biologically Jewish, but I was adopted by a preacher, so I just got the best of maybe both worlds.
Yeah.
Worlds, who knows? It depends on the day.
That's interesting. Yeah. Yeah, and I also think there's something about a religious upbringing that makes people very interested in service, because that's what I've definitely found.
Yeah. Well, I think that like I was talking to somebody about this the other day. My mom is super religious. Like she's very like Christian religious now. And she, I, a lot of things that she says, I'm just like, I think you just want to like be in a kink relationship. Like, I think that like, she was telling me that when I talked to her last, she said, the person that I like that she sees as like a therapist sort of, told her she needs to nurture her inner child. And I'm like, that could easily be fixed.
Yeah, there's all these
Like,
different paths.
yeah, I'm like, so many people I think that are religious, they actually just want, they just like want to have this like kinky relationship, and they would have so much more fun if like
I feel like it's
just
like tapping into the same like universal desire for like
yeah,
connection and like to like altruism to some extent and like
yeah,
caring for each other in community.
yeah. I'm like, you don't have to give a tithe, like, like you know, you
You could
you
tithe your dom. I
yeah,
actually know people who tithe me.
that's great. I love that. But yeah, I'm like, you know, and you don't have to give all these like televangelists, like all, you know, and you don't have to shame anybody for being gay. Like we
Right.
could have so much more fun if everybody just got kinky. Like like the world would be a much better place.
Yeah, and I think there's something about it too that's like more negotiated and talked about rather than like a given, like in its healthiest permutation, like a DS relationship is like well negotiated and boundaried. And I feel like, and consensual. And I feel
Yeah,
like
true.
religion, especially if you're like indoctrinated as a child to like a very religious
Right.
space, it's like none of those things.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting how much I used to say this all the time. I'm like, my dad's a preacher, but my daddy's an atheist. And when I was like playing with somebody who was a hardcore atheist,
Oh,
my first like task that he ever gave me was to read. I had to read like one atheist book a week, and he was like, I'm gonna like save you by unsaving you. And so I'm like, I've read like all these Christopher Hitchens books, and like and it really fucked with me because I was like, whoa, I have no religion now. But then I felt like empty. I was like, oh my God, God's not real. And I like freaked out
must
because
find something else to worship.
yeah, and so, but I got so heavy into my like devotion to my dominant after that. I was like, I need a God. You are my God now.
I
It
It's so interesting. And I feel like too, it's like religions often also have like a masochistic element. And like I do think like it is meeting like a like universal need. Like there's a
yeah,
reason why there's so many similarities between religion. And then I think DS is just like another different way of like negotiating those needs being met. And like I don't know, I feel like anytime I can find attunement with somebody that like that creates an altered state for me that feels like godlike.
yeah, yeah. And I like don't. I think I've just now recently started to understand and enjoy what top space feels like. But
Mm.
for me, it for a while it was like it feels like I took too much Adderall and like or I've had like I'm like I hate it here. Oh my
Like you get me out of
I know, I'm like, this is horrible. Why do people like this? But it's like being very hyper focused and like just having to pay attention to everything. But I finally am now able to enjoy it. Like I'm actually liking. I didn't used to like bottom or topping men.
right.
I like really hated it. I'm like, why are you so whiny? Like I don't even whine this much, okay?
Honestly, that sounds like a hot thing to say to someone.
I'm like, listen, I don't know why male subs that I've played with have just been extra whiny, but I'm like, if I can get waterboarded, you know, every Tuesday and then like get whipped 100 times without sobbing,
Right.
okay, suck it up. And so
I think there's a scene that really sticks out to me in porn. I can't remember who it was, but the bottom was afraid of a cattle prod and she just like cattle prodded her tongue.
oh,
Um
I
was
think Donna did that.
was it Donna? Yeah.
exactly.
It sounds like it.
Like, I think I know what scene you're talking
Yeah.
about.
But I was like hot.
Yeah.
And like I also like trained from the bottom up. So I was like, I actually know what this feels like and I can do that
Yeah.
better than you.
Yeah, like working, I mean, I had to like, I was classically trained too. So
Yeah.
like going through, um, but I honestly, like, I think that I actually do top pretty well because I don't really enjoy it too much. I'm just now kind of coming into it, but
Yeah.
I know, like, I mean, or my first dominant taught me how to do sutures and stuff. I'm like, I know how to do this. Like, I can do this like professionally.
Yeah.
And so I had a lot. I, I know what it's like to have your lips sewn shut
Right.
and your eyelids sewn shut. It's like, that I learned. So I know what that person is going through.
Right.
I think it's like the only thing that, like, I hate this movie a lot, but I think it's the only thing that 50 Shades of Grey hits on that's like somewhat legitimate, of like how the guy was somewhat of a he was a submissive first, and then he became like, he's like, I had to learn, like I learned through this, and I'm like, that's
The movie is just like this is just an abusive relationship where they do
yeah.
some kink stuff.
Oh yeah, it really is. But like that's the only thing in there that I'm like, that's actually kind of a good point. I like am really pro classical training. Like I think that
Yeah.
you should learn from the bottom up, and
I think like at the very least, like try out what something feels like on your body so you know how hard. I
right.
like breaking in toys on my own body. Like
Yeah.
I'm like, that's how they're supposed to be.
You're
So
just
they're
like
like,
painting yourself.
yeah, it's like a self-flagellation. Ooh, a new toy.
Yeah.
But what you were saying about top space is really
Oh,
interesting because for me, it's really fun because I'm like very anxious and hyper vigilant person in general, and top space, like in its best permutation for me, feels like hyper vigilance, but for good. Like
oh,
the hypervigilance of attunement, where
nice.
it's like there's some feedback. So
Mhm.
it's not just like my anxiety spiraling. It's like I am able to like tunnel that hypervigilance and like craft something with it.
Yeah.
So it feels like very useful and like very flow like.
Yeah, that's how I feel about high protocol stuff, because I'm very anxious, and I don't know if I said I have OCD, and
Yeah. Same.
so yeah, I'm very medicated for my OCD, but like I still need structure. So I have when I have structure, like what I love to do with like the 24/7, you had asked me before we did this Zoom what I get out of it.
Yeah.
And what I get out of it is just a place to really throw all of my anxiety and like my need for everything to be like cookie cutter. Like with 24/7, I know at
Yeah.
I know like what I'm supposed to be doing at like any given time. And I
Right.
think that alleviates a lot of the anxiety that sometimes I get playing with new people, where there aren't as many like boundaries. Like with 24/7, you can't just go 24/7 to like start, like you can't,
Yeah.
you have to, it's a slow build. But once you get to that point, like, I mean, I used to have my whole day structured at one time, and like, but I also had time that was for myself, of things that like I had to do for myself.
Right.
And that I so I feel that way about like being a submissive. You're like, I can feel the same about being a dominant, but I like have not tapped into that yet. Like,
Yeah, it's like different paths, and I think like something that DS dynamics and DS relationships offer is structure. And I think people really like that.
yeah.
A lot. Clearly, so many people are into it.
Yeah, I agree. I wanted to shout out, have you read the book, The New Bottoming or The New Topping?
Yeah.
Okay, what did you like them, or
I think they're like a decent like beginning resource for sure.
I I I was getting into this space. I've only read the New Bottoming.
You're like,
And
I'm at the bottom.
yeah, I haven't read the whole thing of like The New Topping, but I was feeling like, I wasn't new when I read them, but I was feeling uh like I had mentioned earlier, like kink wasn't fun anymore,
Yeah.
because everything I was needing to be too perfect. And I sometimes get into this place where I'm really driven by ethics, and like things have to be this way. Like from a leather standpoint, things should be this way.
Right.
Like,
Very
and
type A leather.
yeah, I am. Yes, exactly. I'm like, this is wrong. Like, you did this incorrectly, and now I'm not having fun. So I got into this place where I'm like, I need to be like reconditioned, or like I need to be reset. And I read that book, and it was just so simple, and it like made me feel not so like leather anxious, I guess. It
I
was,
love that. I feel like going back to beginner text is always a good idea. I remember I gave an interview like 3 months ago, and they're like, tell us, what does BDSM stand for? And I'm like, and like, it was like the D and the S stand for two things. It's just like, wow, sometimes going back to the basics is super helpful.
yeah, it helps. But I like felt that it was so simple, but it was kind of like a new. I think their first book, because I mean they had written their original versions of the book, and they were much more like San Francisco strict like leather, stuff. And this new book was a lot less like that. It was like more like why to, instead of like the how to, I think is how they explain it. But just getting into, well, they like reflect a lot on what they used to say, and then
Right.
how like BDSM has evolved to like
Yeah.
better, and I think to be healthier.
Yeah,
And
I totally agree.
yeah,
That's
when
good
I
to know. I'll have to check out the newer versions. And I feel like there's also like maybe this is like a good spot to sort of like end this conversation is like the evolution of old guard into new guard. And like what I really found is like I really like value my like old guard coming into leather in an old guard household because my primary interest was power and I
yeah,
learned a lot, but also I think you can take what serves you and like just like leave the rest because there's some like really problematic shit that like I don't want
yeah,
to replicate in any of my relationships.
right. Yeah, I think that that's a really good way of looking at it. And yeah, take what you want, and you don't, yeah, leave the rest.
Perfect. Okay, I'm gonna end the recording real
Okay,
quick.
cool.
Unless do you have anything else you wanted to?
No, I think that was it.